Hello and welcome to People Making Money, one of the Way to Wow shows. We're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about all those things related to business and professional success and wealth building. And today I'm very pleased to bring to you a pretty unique individual, David Daly. So, if you've seen any of the social media posts promoting this particular episode, I labeled it Flying with His Feet on the Ground because David's business is really at the forefront of how technology is impacting the business world. He is a drone pilot and has become really a nationwide expert in very many different aspects of what's going on with drones. And so I don't want to spend too much time talking myself. I want to get going with David. But one other thing I will mention is David is also a Marine Corps veteran. And you can probably hear in the back of your mind the connection between the two. But right straight off, David, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk business with you about anything related to the drone industry for sure. It's my passion.
Yeah, great. So before we get into what you're currently doing, as I do with all my guests on this show, I'd like to have you go back as far as you're willing to talk about with us in forming your professional life. And so my typical quick kickoff question is, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? Because I know for me, like I wanted to be an astronaut. I think I wanted to be a scientist at one point. I wanted to be an animator. And of course, never in my wildest dreams did I ever think I'd be doing what I ended up doing. So I'm just curious if you're willing to sort of delve into that. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting to ask that question at the point that I'm at right now in my life, because when I was a child, I really thought there were three professions that I was focused on. One was astronaut, another one was paleontologist, and the third was archaeologist. And I went in a much different direction, as I grew older. But my partner had actually asked me probably about 3 or 4 years ago that same question of what did you want to be, when you were a kid? And I thought, well, yeah, I really didn't want to go to war a bunch of times, and I didn't see myself as a person working in corporate America for massive companies like Amazon and whatnot. I wanted to be one of those three things. And when I
Mhm.
when I thought about that question again at this age, I was like, out of those things, archaeology is what I really would like to do. And so I actually, a couple months ago, my bachelor's degree, which I got 20 something years ago, is in oceanography. I have an MBA with an emphasis on geographic information systems, which was all related to my corporate America kind of stuff. And
Right.
I thought I want to go back and become an archaeologist. So I actually started going to school again a couple months ago to get a degree in archaeology, which thankfully a lot of the drone work that I do is used
Oh, we got you frozen.
heavily in archaeology. So it all kind of now that I'm at this
Yeah.
point, I'm going to pursue that as well.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. Well, before we go farther with that, yeah, we're getting a little lag on the thing here. So, um, so as a kid, you're thinking astronaut, archaeologist, paleontologist. Um, you get through school. You said you went to college oceanography. What made you choose oceanography then as your college program?
I was lied to.
Oh,
I went to the Naval Academy, for my undergrad, and at the
oh, okay.
time, I was very focused on I want to be a Marine officer. That's my goal. And so on the day that you went around choosing a major, and the Naval Academy at the time, there were only probably majors, and,
Right.
and so a huge amount. And so I went to the room to check out their major, and it was economics. And, I asked the instructor, how does it Marine officer? And he's like, next. And said, this makes me Marines all this stuff himself like this is amazing. This and that has nothing to do really. That's how I got into it. I actually really like.
Okay, so and that was at the Naval Academy. Wow. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So 4 years at the Naval Academy, Marine Corps option, right? You graduate, you're a second lieutenant, and what was your first duty station, and what was it like actually being in the Marine Corps as opposed to being a student?
Very different experience, and I think most people do. When I was in Quantico, having had back injury, spine and my two pieces. So I spent the first year doing a lot of appointments at the Navy hospital, and eventually ended up getting a spinal fusion. So that first year was a lot of recovery time and whatnot. But once that was completed, I was in that California was a officer. So I'm sort of like on the job training while I was healing. And then, shortly after I was, I was just out of the academy in May of 2001. So a few months later, when 9/11 happened, everything changed. Especially if you were in the Marine Corps, it wasn't a matter of if you were going to war, it was when and how many times. And so once I was healed, it was almost a nonstop cycle of going back and forth. And in my case, it ended up being 4 tours in Iraq and 1 tour in Afghanistan before I had completed my time in the Marine Corps.
And you were with what, third Marine Division? What Pendleton is it?
First Marine Division.
First Marine Division. Okay.
First Marine Division. So I first tours, mainly in Iraq. I took part that back that was there. Was itself. And I were embedded in the Iraqi Army battalion, taught them deal. And then the fourth tour, I was back in Iraq, Fallujah, Iraq, with 1st Recon Battalion, which is also out of camp. Got out of the Marine Corps for a short bit, and then they asked me to come back to Afghanistan. And so I was, at the time, I was actually doing Afghanistan as well. So I agreed to do that tour, and I think that was one of those, like, maybe I had made a mistake getting out, and after I did that tour, when I came back in, I thought, no, I made the right choice. It was time to go.
So how many years all told did you spend in the Marine Corps?
I think total was probably, when you add all my active duty time, and then the last tour they had made a reserve time, I think it was around 12 years total in the service.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, something like that.
So that's interesting, because usually once someone crosses over the 10-year mark, they feel like, well, I might as well stay for 20 years, right, and get a pension. So what was it that made you decide that, after 12 years, essentially, you were going to move on? So like in my case, I moved on after 16 years, but that's because I hit maximum age. So it was going to be, not a fight per se, but it was going to be a long process to apply to get to stay right beyond maximum age. But in your case, I don't imagine that was the situation. So what was it that, motivated you to, move on, as you mentioned?
Well, really there were 2 factors in it. The first was I enjoyed a lot of the more kinetic sides of the military, and so when I was a captain and lower, you're doing a lot of the on the ground kind of stuff, and that the door kicking kind of deals, like that was what excited me and what interested me and whatnot. And I remember towards the very end of my last tour, the one in Afghanistan, the colonel of the unit I was attached to had asked me to put together a presentation on the overall scheme of how things were moving in an area. And when I completed the presentation, showed him, he said, you have some qualities that are going to make an excellent staff officer. And I was like, oh, sir, I was like, you should have just shot me, and so that's just not, it just wasn't what I was in the military for. It's a young man's game, or a woman's game. And at the point where I was at, I was probably, almost 10 years out of that back operation, and just beating myself, down, and it couldn't continue. So I know I'm not at 100%, I'm not right to stick around if I couldn't give that 100. And honestly, another factor that I didn't realize till a little bit after getting out was I had developed over those tours a very high level of PTSD, and I was having issues that I just was not addressing, and so it was the right time to leave for those reasons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that absolutely makes sense. So what planning did you do for transitioning from active duty Marine Corps to civilian life?
I did a lot of planning. I was very aware that lots of heavy looking higher, military off, and the Academy had for that. And when I got to the getting out the first time, I had a job lined up before I even left, and they
Oh,
were I had actually gotten a job in the aerospace industry, and was flying around the world doing all kinds of stuff related to we built various components for aircraft, so it was a lot of meeting with engineers and whatnot. But at the time, it seemed like it was going to be a phenomenal job, and so before I even EAS'd, I had everything lined up and tickets to go to our first and all that. So it seemed like I had a job lined up that I was really going to enjoy.
hmm. And you got out around what 2012, 13, something like that, or?
The first time was 2008, and part of the reason that brought me back to the war zone is because in the aerospace industry, you usually have about a 2-year lag from like the overall economy, versus the impact that it
Mhm.
has to the airline industry when you're talking about the manufacturing of it. And so as a
Right.
result, I entered into the workforce during the Great Recession, and so
Mhm.
um, at first things were going really well for the company, but then as things started hitting the aerospace industry, airlines were more concerned about critical pieces of gear like landing gear and stuff that my part of the company was manufacturing, like latch faucets or hinges for overhead compartments. So
Right.
with the economy turning, it very quickly became, the company just started laying off massive chunks, and
Yeah.
eventually most of the people on my part, we were all let go, and that actually brought me back into the contractor world, where I said, well, I guess war zones are, so I went back to war zones to be a contractor.
Right. Right. And this is all before there was any kind of significant transition assistance program, as I recall. Right. So you were
They had a very
pretty much,
basic, yeah, it was a 1 week program. They didn't have skill bridge or anything like that. It was, which is
yeah.
unfortunate. Those are great programs to have now. And so you essentially went to class for a week, and they looked at what you did in the military. And, in my case, as an artillery officer, they said, yeah, pretty much none of the artillery stuff transfers over. It's going to ask you to blow anything up. Um, so, it was a very basic check in the box, and, here's how to apply for VA stuff. That was really,
Yeah.
and it was fortunate, but the assistance, make sure you got your EAS TV, and
Right.
we're out the door.
Yeah. Yeah. I went through transition assistance program in 2012, and it was still pretty much like that, and
Right.
frankly, not really worth the time. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and, and it's interesting because when I got out of the military, initially what I did is I coached service members coming off active duty, transitioning to civilian life in terms of getting a job. And I would hear this from Marines all the time. They would say, well, I'm a trigger puller, and, nobody in the civilian world needs me to pull triggers. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's, may be true, although there's lots of, jobs in law enforcement and such where, being good with small arms is a big advantage. But it's all of the things, it's the Marine Corps ethos that is embedded in Marines that makes them the most valuable, former military people, in terms of the civilian world. And yet there wasn't any sense of that given to Marines, at least at that time, in
Right.
terms of this is really what, the civilian, business world, this is how they will value you, as an individual. So I think there's more of a sense of that now than there was, 10, 12 years ago. So
easier, coming out as an officer, because people recognize, like, well, you're a leader, so that's what I'm hiring you for. I don't care that you can, lob an artillery round, 18 clicks this way, or whatever.
Right.
It's where you're a leader. But especially for the enlisted service members, I think there was a huge disservice done, in those days to not giving the best chance. And the numbers showed that when you looked at unemployment numbers, homeless numbers, addiction, suicide, all that stuff, from the VA in those years, they were much worse than they are now. And I think directly as a result of not being properly prepared to, change from a completely different environment into, one that has a whole other set of playing, roles and ways of doing things.
Yeah. The one thing that I would also try to stress, especially to Marines, is the military is a pretty ordered environment, and civilian life is not. Civilian life in some ways is more like combat. I think, sort of the unpredictability of it, and the, just the chaos of it. Obviously it's not nearly as lethal, but for Marines who have actually been in combat, I think they in some ways are better prepared to face the civilian world, where it's so atavistic that it's really, it can be very daunting after the fairly regimented life that we led in the military. So and again, that's I think that's not something that a lot of people think about, a lot of military people think about, and so it needs to be brought to their attention so they can have that advantage. So now you're I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
And I think another component is within an organized system like that, you have a well-defined purpose. And in the civilian world, even if you have a title for a specific job, a lot of ambiguity that's in that. And so you don't, I know for myself and for a lot of members and former service members I've spoken with, understand it's very difficult if you're not having a transition period.
And it's actually, it's very interesting you mentioned that, because the first part of the program I ran was to help service members understand what is your purpose and mission in civilian life going to be. Because what I found is, without understanding that, the chances that they were going to successfully transition were dramatically reduced. And in fact, I did a kind of an informal survey of about 100 service members who had been in transition for anywhere from a few months to, in some cases, 20 or 25 years. And what I found was, the longer someone was in transition, the less likely they were to really understand what is my purpose and mission in civilian life. And the flip side was, once somebody understood that, he really, he could step forward smartly, as we say, and like I said, dramatically increase the chances of his transition being, not just successful but meaningful. Because I think
Right.
that is a big part of what we lose. It's the work we do in the military is very meaningful, and it's not a natural thing to find that in civilian life.
Right. Right. Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so now you're absolutely getting out of the Marine Corps, right? And this, the kind of the second time you got out after Afghanistan, what was your experience like? What did you end up doing, and how did that fit with what you thought life would be like?
Well, when I got out, I did another contractor tour, because at the time the money was just really that went back to Afghanistan for another year as a civilian, and essentially ran a base for the army. I was like the camp mayor, if you will, for a base out there. And once that year was completed, I met my we kind of decided, hey, the going back and forth to war zones and stuff, that's just not the life we want, and whatnot. So decide, okay, let's find something here. So I worked for years out
Oh.
of that, and then went into the construction industry. I ran a construction company out in the Anaheim, and
Hmm.
ended up leaving that after a little over a year, and kind of was at a point of transition where I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and we had a natural disaster kind of thing destroyed our house, and so we had lost our house, and it was really one of those things where we were like, well, we don't have a house, we can kind of decide where to go from here. And so we decided to go to Montana, and in Montana I started kind of figuring out, like, what is it that I want to do from there.
Hmm.
And for that, I had been I was starting to have a lot of issues with PTSD, and kind of on a whim, I had gotten a drone, and was flying this drone around, and I noticed that when I was flying the drone, I received a little bit of relief from my PTSD symptoms, and so my wife had commented that you're getting this benefit from flying the drones. Can you make that a business? Like, why don't you, make that a business? And at first I was very hesitant to do that. And I was like, I don't know anything about drones. And this is kind of in the infancy of the commercial drones out there. So there weren't like a whole lot of options. It's not like now where,
Hmm.
everybody has a drone and whatnot. And there wasn't anywhere to really go to learn about it. You had to kind of, just learn it all on your own. And eventually, though, she kept giving me a lot of positive reinforcement. Like, no, I really think you don't need to find another job and run some company or something. You can start your own thing. And so eventually,
Hmm.
I was like, yeah, let me see if I can make you go out of it. So I bought a little bit of a better drone, and that kind of started it from there.
So I'm curious about this idea that flying drones helped you deal with your PTSD. What is your sense of why that was the case?
Definitely not a doctor, so I can't give like a professional medical
Yeah.
opinion. However, my thought is, with my PTSD, I've done pretty much every therapy that's out there for it. So
Mhm.
one of them is there's a therapy where the idea is that part of having PTSD is that the two halves of the brain have not processed a same way. And so you do things like you follow a moving object, or something, it's like a light that flashes, and you connect on sides, you're active. So when that particular event, it helps side EMR. So my personal thought is that um, because when you are flying a drone, you have to use both sides of your body to operate it with the control. You're effectively activating both of the
Hmm.
brain. So I think, I saw the relief therapy. My thought is they're fine. Something traumatic, a day in, as in effect seeing it on both halves of the brain, and then I'm not as anxious right now, or my alertness, isn't as high, and I think it also helps that, when you're looking at the you're visually looking at the screen, normally have, for me and for a lot of the other, veterans and like who just have experience that benefit from drones. I think that different perspective allows you to kind of back out for a second from that in different ways. So just kind of, what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it'd be interesting on that, and see if that same effect from the eye movement therapy, would translate to doing something like, drones. Because I actually think that would be a great application for people who are suffering all kinds of trauma to be able to fly drone, and maybe that activates that same kind of response.
Yeah. I mean, that is fascinating. I mean, as you said, there's all kinds of therapies out there with animals. I know
Right.
someone who takes veterans out on sailboats and these kind of things. And my sense is that flying a drone could be a very sort of peaceful thing at the same time that it takes a lot of concentration to keep it flying. And so, yeah, there's a lot of aspects of that yeah, could potentially be therapeutic. So it
Mhm.
certainly makes sense. So you're in Montana, and I'm just curious, why did you choose Montana as a place to go to?
Because I had a lot of PTSD, and I wanted to be away from everything as I could, and so I look back now as it probably wasn't the best decision, because I was giving into a lot of PTSD rather than addressing it. But
Mm,
we went to a town in literally the geographic center of the state of Montana. Only a couple thousand people there, and very remote. And for that isolation, to just get away from, and so it was not a healthy decision to go there. But
mm.
that was why we chose Montana. And when I say we, I really mean me. Saying like, I need to get out of here to make that decision.
Right, right, and your devoted wife went along with the plan. So you're in Montana. You're flying drones. Your wife has convinced you that you should make a business out of it. So what did that look like in terms of going from kind of flying drones just as a hobby or therapy to figuring out how to turn that into a business?
Well, I looked at, what could you do with the technology, and now there's a lot of options, but at that time, drones were essentially flying cameras. So it's like, well, what's the data that you can collect that you're interested in? And so, I actually started doing things like photographs for, landscape photos, even for like photo contests or something, to just to bring in any kind of revenue. And then I started at people in that area asked for things like insurance flights. There was snow damage to their roof, and so they needed, you could fly over and film that. And so it initially started with smaller kind of random gigs, that people had, because again, it was a very rural area, but
Mhm.
shortly after, we were only there for about 2 years or so. We moved back to Southern California. There, the market was much, and so I was able to kind of, focus in on the demand in this real photography.
Mm.
My did that at the same time, also finding this in such a the infancy of the industry. Tons of people writing about it, and tons of people.
Mhm.
And so really actually not knowing what's on, in what I can write about it. And so I started doing, it actually became a some of out and many magazines, and internationally, especially that late in 2019 timeframe. It was really picking up with the quality of accessibility, and the FAA putting out the licensing and everything. And so there was a lot of content that I was able to put out. Definitely hundreds of articles on that. And so those two aspects initially became like the main bread and butter of the business.
So you talked about you were really servicing the real estate industry. What kinds of jobs did you do, or projects did you do working with the real people in the real estate business, and what kind of clients did you have, among real estate professionals or people involved in real estate?
Yeah, it was a very diverse group. Everything from speculators investing on large tracts of vacant land for various industries that were popping up in a given area. Everything from like growing hemp to building shopping malls or whatever. All over the country, and it was primarily in the residential market, but also some commercial real estate. And when you look at like the National Association of Realtors, I had a real estate license for a little while. Just decided not to make that a career and let it expire. But when you get into that, you see the statistics that if you have a property that is just photos on the ground, it doesn't sell anywhere near as quickly as if you have aerial photos of it, showing different aspects. The number, I want to say it's something like the NRA says, or the NAR, I'm sorry, says it's something like 60% more likely to sell if it has aerial photos. Because the National Association of Realtors is saying most real estate that combination, and they just know that people want to see what it looks like from above, and what the from different angles and the streets, and not so they're picking up. And at the time, everywhere, so a lot of real estate agents, land, development going on and whatnot. The interest rates were a little more friendly than they are now. So, like being for sites that were people looking to, at least they had already made, so that they could go into big, better.
Right. And during this time, so you're now a drone pilot, right? But maybe 2 years before that, that was completely unknown. So what made you a drone pilot, or how did you? This may sound a little bit sort of new agey, but how did you build into your identity being a drone pilot? Kind of going back to what we were talking about in terms of purpose and mission,
Right.
How did that work?
Really helped with that, because with the writing, I was putting out a decent amount of content so that my name was getting out there, and there was always something I could relate back to, like here's an article that I wrote about what you're asking, about as far as drones in agriculture or drones for. So there was always content I could connect back, want to talk to about this, and if you need somebody to fly and do that, as well. And so the writing the content really was of building identity, and then the fact that business for that I never put into this, because before I always was like, well, the business that I'm starting is ancillary to whatever Fortune 500 company I'm working for or whatnot. And I think that if you really want to get into entrepreneurship, it has to be an all-in kind of thing. You can't, otherwise it's just going to be a side hustle. It's not going to work. And so this was really the first, not going out to Amazon to find a job, or the Google. All that kind of stuff. And so that to build identity is what I do. Once you get networks around that time, as opposed to here for, the industry or whatnot. And you come, the changes, it starts to become your identity because you've made that commitment of I'm all in. This has to be, what I do. It's not just a side project. And so I think that the purpose grew out of the involvement interest. And you have to get involved into it if you want something you are. And so really what's going on, everything to the industry and the go-to my area.
And at the same time, I think you mentioned the FAA was starting a licensing program. How did your work in writing and in actually piloting drones, how did that intersect, if you will, with what was going on with the FAA and what is, oops. Oh no, we lost David. I think he's been having bandwidth problems there. So let's see if he comes back, because we're really getting into the crux of what he's doing as a drone pilot and all of that. So we'll see if he comes back here in a minute. I'll tap dance here for a few minutes. So what's interesting and what hopefully I'll be able to ask David about is what it was like to being involved in a nascent regulatory environment. So this is something I went through when I had my real estate company before joining the Navy. One of my main activities was real estate appraisal, and prior to 1989, I believe it was, there were no licenses for real estate appraisers. It was pretty much, oh, there we go. Great. Okay. Oops. Hey,
hello
David.
Again.
Okay, I was doing a little bit of a time step while hoping you'd be able to get back on. So I was addressing the issue that I was talking about was being at the nascency of a regulatory, the creation of a regulatory regime. So I know for myself, before I joined the Navy, I had a real estate company, and one of the activities I did was being a real estate appraiser, which was essentially a completely as a self-regulated industry prior to a law called FIREA being enacted in 1989, which created state-by-state licensing for real estate appraisers, but also imposed all kinds of new regulatory requirements on lenders. And so I remember being, again, at the very beginning of that, and my clients were coming to me and saying, well, how do we comply with all this stuff, right? I was an appraiser, right? And so presumably I know everything there is to know about appraising, right? And I very quickly had to, dig into all of the depths of it. And it was new, so there weren't a lot of,
right.
Right? There wasn't a lot around. So what was your experience like being at the nascency of the creation of the regulatory structure for drones and drone piloting?
Yeah, I was actually really fortunate because at the same time that the FAA, I started the drone company officially as an LLC in, I want to say it was either June or July of 17. And so it was right at that time when the FAA had put that out. So since it was still very new to be a licensed pilot, I was able to jump into that right away. And what that allowed for was, you were one of the few licensed pilots, and that became, a marketing tool that you could say, well, like, you don't want to break the law, that you're hiring a illegal pilot. And, I think initially people didn't care. And to some extent, that's still prevalent in people that haven't taken the time to read that you as the real estate agent hiring somebody would be liable potentially for damages that a drone pilot you hire caused. And so since I was able to say, look, I'm licensed, I'm insured, and I've been doing this, already, it was, kind of the right time, right place to be in that. And then, as more and more pilots kept adding on, and it was like, well, most people aren't going to hire somebody who's not, a licensed pilot at a minimum.
Right.
You were able to say, like, I've been a licensed pilot since 2017 and not had any issues, and flown hundreds and hundreds of gigs, kind of thing. So
Mhm.
that it was actually a real benefit to just happen to be getting into that industry when it was right opening up with the licensing process.
Right, right, right. And that's interesting, because that was very similar to my experience, because I got involved in the appraisal business just maybe like a year before the whole regulatory regime started, and I did the same thing. Um, Basically, aggressively marketed being a licensed appraiser, not just a member of a professional association kind of thing.
Right,
And it had, interestingly enough, it had a very what had deleterious impact on these professional organizations, because all of a sudden, lenders especially were saying, well, we don't care if you're an MAI, a member of the Appraisal Institute. We can go get a certified general real estate appraiser licensed by the state of whatever, and that sounds better, right?
right.
So yeah, it's interesting how that works out. So how have you continued to grow and develop your business? You've been in business now for what, about 7 years? How has it changed over that time period?
Well, one of the most exciting things is, I had been writing content for a company called Altitude University, that is a online platform that has classes for learning the material to become a drone pilot, and then some additional course content for improving your abilities as a pilot. And I had been writing content for a while, and then after talking to the owners in 22, they had said, hey, we'd like to bring you on board, for a piece of the company, and so I
Oh,
effectively in 2022 became, a part owner in that company, and effectively am the COO for Altitude University. So that was a really big expansion, because it went from just providing the drone services and being an industry analyst to actually having a significant play in the bringing up of new pilots. And
mhm.
so eventually it got to where, now I run Altitude University on a day to day basis, and put out a lot of the content, for their YouTube channel. So we have a really strong showing on our YouTube channel for Altitude University of little over 27,000 subscribers.
Wow.
And yeah, we grow probably between 400 and 500 a month subscriber base. And our content, every Friday we put out a new video on something related to the drone industry. And so that's actually been a great way to gain more and more attention. And you could start to see, as you'd show up to like the drone conferences, people would be like, oh, I saw your video, or whatnot, kind of thing. And that really helps, because I think now, just as we're seeing, right now, that I think is the way people want to take information in, is seeing,
Mhm.
video content. It's
For
quick,
sure, for
it's easy to interpret, and that's what people want. And so, by putting that content out there, I think it gives a lot of credit to, anybody who's doing that. And, in my case, it's certainly helped. I've had lots of customers, say, hey, I saw your video, can you do this gig for me, or whatnot.
sure. And what do you see as being the future? How do you see the drone business changing, growing? Some kind of competition coming that might impact the drone business. What do you see happening in that respect?
Well, there's two things. One, I think, if you look at all the estimates, the growth of the industry is very solid for, at a minimum, the next 10 years, but probably beyond that. Um, the competition out there, I would say, is it's a little difficult to call it competition, because drone technology is rapidly evolving. It's very similar to like the smartphone business,
Mhm.
where uh, the new phone that you get now, 6 months from now, is dated and it looks like it's a complete failure. You need to get the newest, latest thing. But the reality is that things like AI and machine learning, once they become more prevalent in drones, I think you're going to see the adoption and adaptations for drones rapidly, grow. And the reality of it is that in most cases, technology is not the issue for the drone industry; it's regulatory issues.
Oh,
So for instance, if you could have a drone, like right now, the FAA requires drone pilots to constantly keep a drone in visual line of sight without the aid of anything like binoculars or whatnot. So
oh.
you can't really fly a drone beyond, you know, maybe a mile, mile and a half, or so is where you're getting to the point where, like, realistically, you're not going to see the drone, anymore. But the
Hmm.
technology is such that, most off the shelf drones that you have can fly 6, 7, 8 miles away from your location and still operate fine.
Hmm.
And so you have to get waivers to do what they call beyond visual line of sight flying. Well, once regulatory conditions change and say, now that we're comfortable with the technology and we're comfortable with the safety of it, you can imagine if you no longer had that restriction, well, there's way more applications that you can, have for that technology. So I think that when you look at things like the way that the industry is growing, it's going to be rapidly growing because it provides so many benefits, that are no brainer kind of things. Like,
Hmm.
just to give one example, if you look at the UN reports for population growth associated with the food production in the world, I believe it's by 2050, we're not going to have enough production at the current methods of producing food to feed the population of the world. So that's where you look at, like, okay, we have to do precision agriculture. Well, you can take a drone and you can fly over a field and see nitrate levels in the soil. You can see how the water's being, distributed. You can count crops. You can even detect disease on crops, all from, flying a drone over. Now, before, that would have taken somebody, a long time in a field to test soil samples and send it to a lab or whatever. And, in 20 minutes, I can fly over, a few acres of a field and give that same information. And so it's like, well, now you've got, lowering cost, higher efficiency, better data that I can go back to, not just, I saw this, one sample from the soil that I took. It's like, well, I can look at the whole field and tell you where the nitrate levels are and whatnot. And it's like that kind of beneficial and advantageous, aspects of the technology are going to make it that it's like, it just has to be adopted, because there's things like food production that without it, we're not going to be able to sustain, and so I think that the future holds an enormous amount of applications like that. And once the regulatory side catches up to it, then you're going to see, more and more IA controlled or AI controlled platforms, things that instead of having like a single pilot controlling a drone, you have a pilot controlling 20 drones, or a node center controlling 50 drones or whatnot, and having the ability to have a much greater impact on whatever the application is than you can now with the restrictions that we have.
Hmm. I mean, one of the uses for drones that's been talked about now for, I think, at least a couple of years, and this kind of dovetails. You've mentioned Amazon a few times. Is for deliveries, whether
Mhm.
it's deliveries by Amazon, or I'm thinking about my local sushi place, right? They could get a drone, and it would seem like they could attach the bag to the drone and basically just program in my address and have they wouldn't even need to have someone watching it. The drone would come and drop it off on my front step and go back to the restaurant. But if it had to be, I didn't realize they had to be in visual. You have to have them in visual contact. So there's no way that a delivery business could do that. So what do you think is going to propel? I assume it's the FAA that is the major regulatory agency. What do you think is going to propel the FAA to start um, e- reforming, I guess, the regulatory scheme? I don't mean this as a political statement, but government bureaucracies are notorious for being,
Right.
slow to evolve and to be behind the curve with business and technological changes. So how is that going to work its way, do you think?
Well, I think there's really two bodies that are the main ones that are regulatory. When you talk about drone technology, the FAA is the biggest, but then you also have the FCC. Because you're using radio communication to control these drones.
Okay.
And so if you look at the bigger picture and say, okay, the FAA is looking at everything in the air. That's all the crewed aircraft flying around. And then when you look at drones, the FAA has this great page that they update every couple of weeks called Drones by the Numbers. And they tell you how many drones are registered now and how many pilots there are and whatnot. There's almost 800,000 registered drones in the US. And
Oh,
that's just registered drones. That's not kids playing with toys or whatnot that aren't being registered, or
right.
people that haven't taken the time to register. So if you think about the whole history of flight in the country and all the aircraft that have gotten a registration number, there are now in a very short time, that's about 100 years worth of history for crewed aircraft flight. There are now in a relatively short time for the commercial drone industry, more drones have been registered than crewed aircraft in that entire history. And so when you think about the airspace, around, just our country, for instance, that's a really complex problem, to sit there and
Mhm.
say, okay, we can fly all the crewed aircraft that we have going, whether that be the military, the commercial, the private stuff, everything. Now let's throw hundreds of thousands of drones potentially in the air. That is a massive problem. And so, to the FAA's credit, although as a drone professional, I would love to see a lot of the regulations loosened up a little bit. To their credit, it's a big safety issue, and they're trying their best to say, how do we move forward, but move forward safely? With this massive problem that they're undertaking and stuff, because they realize the benefit. And when you hear the FAA representatives at like the drone conferences speak, they're all about it. They just want to do it safely, And so
Mhm.
I think that the more technological advancements that come out that show this technology is safe, because there are a lot of waivers that the FAA gives to allow people to fly beyond visual line of sight. You just have to
Mhm.
go through the process of saying this is why it's going to be safe enough that you can loosen the rules for this one particular thing I want to do with the drone.
Mhm.
Um, I think as the technology starts to get where the FAA is more comfortable with saying like, okay, this isn't a fluke that your drone didn't have an accident. I can see where these algorithms and this machine learning and these sensors on the drone to prevent it from hitting something have made it now that I'm comfortable with saying I can throw this in the air without you being able to see it. And I think that technology is moving along very quickly, and so
Mhm.
probably in the next couple of years, it will be where, you can fly without seeing it. And that'll just be, normal. I mean, when I first got my license, you couldn't fly at night without a waiver. Now you can fly
Oh,
at night, because and I had to go through the process of, writing this big complex report to the FAA for them to give me my night waiver so I could fly, at night, and all kinds of this, how it's going to be safe and, whatnot. But now, if you get your license, you know the rules, and as long as you stay within those, you can fly at night. And I think it'll become like that in a couple years, so
mhm.
that you're going to start seeing things like the drone delivery,
Mhm.
become more consistent. Because again, it's just like with the agriculture. There are so many benefits to that technology that you can't ignore that. You have to, let it be safe, but you're not going to say like, we're just not going to do that. It's just it's not feasible.
Right. What advice do you have for people who are thinking, hey, this drone piloting or the drone commercial drone industry, this sounds pretty interesting. I want to check this out, or I want to get involved with it. What advice do you have for for someone who's thinking that?
Oh, I would definitely say you just have to go into it right away. Like the barrier to entry in this industry is so low compared to others. Where we had a video for Altitude University that we put out where we showed how for $3,000 or less you could start a drone business.
Mm.
Everything you needed that included like filing the regulatory paperwork to make it an LLC or whatever you want to make or whatever. And it's like there aren't many businesses where you can do that. And then when you look at the like even at a starting salary, or a starting pay, you'd probably be looking at about $50 an hour for a drone pilot.
Mm.
Whereas like I'd say you can pretty quickly get to where you're making 150 an hour. So if your total investment is $3,000, you're very quickly making that up.
Mhm.
So that your break even point is very easy to attain, within a month or two, if
Mhm.
not sooner. And so for me, I say that, it's a fantastic industry that, there's a little bit of knowledge you have to learn, but like in our course at Altitude for that, it's a $97 course. It's all online, self-paced. We have like over a 99% success rate for people who take that course and pass the FAA exam on their first try.
Mhm.
And if you really wanted to, you could probably complete that course in a weekend. Most people take about 2-3 weeks to do it. But
Mhm.
so realistically, if you just dove in and did that, within a weekend you could be ready to take a test, and then now you have a marketable skill that you can go out and test out. So I would say just jump right in, take a course, learn the material, get your license, and then just like having a driver's license, it opens up a bunch of revenue generating potential streams for you to tap into. And that's where, for a very limited amount of money, you can say, let me see if there's anything in this. Do I want to do this as a side hustle, or do I really want to get into it? And then you can get into, maybe I want to work for a company as their drone pilot, not run my own business, which offers benefits like 401ks and healthcare and all that. So I would say it is a industry that is projected by pretty much everybody to be growing, especially for the next 10 years. It's great to jump into. So now is the time that if you're thinking about it, you should already start stepping in and just moving forward with it. There's very little saying don't do this.
Yeah, I mean the kind of income potential that you're talking about. I mean, it's much greater than you could get as an Uber driver, for example, or
Right.
all of these things, right? I mean, even $50 an hour, I mean that of course is not your net income, but it would seem to me the expenses of running a drone business are pretty low. So you're gonna
Right.
the lion's share of your hourly fee is going to be income to you as the pilot. So let me broaden this out now a little bit. You are a successful entrepreneur in the purest meaning of that word. You're not just someone who started a business, but you're someone who, in essence, innovated to create not only a new business but be at the forefront of a new industry. So, what do you think are the or were the keys to your succeeding in doing that? If you had to pick, say, three things that have made you a success as an entrepreneur, what would you say those are? And you don't have to be limited to three, by the way, but just sometimes it's easier to think in terms of
Right.
a fixed number.
I would say, first of all, just like I had said earlier, I was very fortunate to have a partner who was saying, you need to go all in. Don't get a job. This is your thing. So, if you want to be a success as an entrepreneur, you have to go all in to whatever that business is. So that's one. The second one is,
Let me just clarify. When you say a partner, in this case, you mean your wife.
yeah, we're actually separated now, but we're
Oh,
still, very close, friends and fam. And so that's why I say, partner.
oh, okay.
But with entrepreneurship, you have to go all in. I think that's first.
Okay.
Second, I think what's important is you have to understand, like, it's not going to be easy at times, and you don't want to go into the panic mentality of, like, I'm not getting enough drone gigs. Maybe I should go back and jump back into corporate, America. You just have to keep going with it. And then the
Mhm.
other thing is, it's networking. I think as a Marine, I found a lot of success because I was surrounded by a lot of fantastic people that were really all good at what they did. When I
Mhm.
got out into the civilian world, one of the biggest mistakes I made initially was like, I got to have all the answers. I got to be that guy. It's only me. I'm the one, whatever.
Mhm.
And then you realize it's not that. It's, you need to have, just like you did in the service, a team around you. And
Mhm.
that's where you start networking with other, in my case, drone professionals and whatnot. And you learn from everybody. You share that knowledge and whatnot. And those, I think, are the real keys. Be 100% in. Don't give into panic, and make sure you network and build that team around you.
I mean that is as cogent a theory or as cogent a program, I should call it, of entrepreneurial successes I think I've ever heard. I agree with that absolutely 100%. And I for those of you who are watching and are thinking about getting into some kind of entrepreneurial venture. Those three perspectives, if you will, certainly I can say that that's what powered my own success in the various companies and such that I've been involved with. And the other thing is you can do all three of those things. They're not a guarantee of success, but what they are is they're the best support you can have for being successful. And if you couple them with hard work, the chances that you'll fail are actually reduced significantly. So everybody hears these statistics about how 4 in 5 businesses fail and blah, 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 blah. But you have to really dig behind those and figure out, why did those 4 in 5 fail? What caused it? And oftentimes it's a lack of one or more of the three factors that you just mentioned. So, So we're kind of running out of time here. But before we sign off, just want to any last thoughts that you'd like to share with people.
Yeah, I would just say, that from my perspective, the drone industry is one of the best ones you can get into. And that, if you're looking to start a business, like I said, the barrier to entry is so low compared to something else, with a great return on the flip side. So I would say, now is the time to dive into that. And, it's been fantastic for me, and I think it'll be fantastic for a lot of people.
Great. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I appreciate it. I'm going to have you hang tight. I'm going to do a little wrap up, and then we can talk offline for a minute. But first of all, I'll put your contact information in the show notes after the show posts. So if people want to get in touch with you, both at your own business and is it called Altitude University?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll put information from both of those there. So if people want to follow up with you, they can. And I'm sure that David, if you're interested in the drone industry, I'm sure David will be happy to help you, find the information you need, etc. So, I would say don't hesitate to reach out to him. And I'll also put a link to the Altitude University YouTube channel where, if you're a viewer or you're listening to this, you can get information. You can see the kinds of things that David has been talking about. So I have to tell you, as you're saying, go and get your, I'm thinking maybe I'm going to go get my license, because a lot of the work I do is in real estate. And there have been several times when I was thinking, gosh, I wish I could just see the top of this building. To carry around a drone these days is nothing, right? I can have it in my car or my Jeep, and I could launch it. And like right now, we're dealing with a roof leak in one of the buildings. It'd be nice just to be able to go over and really see what's going on there, right? So, for a few $1,000s, it could be worth it just for to enhance the ability for me to do the work that I'm already doing, right?
Yeah, I'd be happy to consult you on all that.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to take you up on that. So, for those of you who are watching, thank you so much for joining us today. And just real quickly wrapping up, tomorrow, Thursday, 5 p.m. is my every other week show, Jiggers' Place. This is an opportunity for us, as the week is coming to a close, to relax, have a cocktail, and talk about all those subjects not related to business and professions. And so we are going to be talking about the ages-long existential question, faith or reason, right? It seems like for millennia, the two sides have been duking it out, and I'm hopefully going to give you some thoughts on why that's the case and what that's all about, while we have a divine logic cocktail. So if you want to get the recipe, just go to my website, scroll down to the bottom, and subscribe to my email list, and that way you'll get an email before each show. And for Jiggers' Place, it includes the recipe for the cocktails that I'll be making. And then next week on Monday, normally is my show Trusts and Estates Weekly, but this coming Monday is Columbus Day, so there'll be a special edition of the Way to Wow shows marking Columbus Day. And then Tuesday at 10 a.m. is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And then, of course, a week from today will be the next edition of People Making Money. So once again, thank you so much for joining me. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you really are my belle. Courage at all times, my friend.